blink, blink. Test, 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 test. Good morning. Go to sleep more yet. Thank you. What? Oh. Hold on. Good morning. Oh. Good morning, good morning. Thank you. Thank you, Ash, for the $10 donor. I will give you a shake for donating again off stream. Thank you so much for the donations. What do I do? Oh yeah. Good morning, all. How is everyone doing? Hello, chat. Good morning. What do I do? Looks at Ash. Thank you. I actually I've taken the donation bar off of the screen because I wanted to just discourage donating for a while. But thank you. Good's here. Welcome. Good morning. So, what was I going to talk about? Oh, that's right. On the donation goal, before I took it away, it used to be Dorime hands, and I finally got around to adding them to the model, which took me a rather long time to do, but if I can remember the shortcut... Hey! Now I have prayer hands. I have the Dori Verita. Ameno. The Dori Verita. No, don't worry about... I'm real prayer hands. They should be rigged correctly. I only tested it a couple of times. But yeah. I hope it was worth waiting for these hands to return. Now I can be caught praying whenever. Also, I updated my sad face so that it looks more sad. I know that's quite something, but sad face looking even more sad. I look so upset. Yeah. I wonder what I'm praying for. I know it doesn't seem like much, but I'm not very good at rigging, and so adding things to my model is super heavy. I mean, partly because it takes 5 minutes to save, but also partly because I have to liquefy Live 2D every 10 minutes. But anyway, oh, she's praying for the day she can finally finish her ice cream. I tell you what, I added a bonus to the model while I was rigging the Dorime hands as as a nod off to my ice cream eating, I now also have let's see. Where is it? Audit? Oh, hold on. I have it somewhere. I need to I need to go and add it. Okay. Thank you for the kind words. I also now have ice cream. I added a bun ice cream eating hand. I hope you like it. Now I can be eating ice cream all the time. And I think that this is appropriate in its own way, because obviously this ice cream is never going to melt or be finished, which I think is true to life. I don't have chopsticks for it. And what I was going to do originally was I was going to make like a pair of eating hands with like... Oh, thank you so much for the 500 bits, Canary. I don't know what to do with bits, but I appreciate it anyway. It's true. I'm never going to finish my ice cream, and so I'm just gonna be eating this forever. But that's okay too. You can exchange. Oh, that's right. That's okay. I'll let them sit in the bank. Thank you, though. Ice cream for anniversary. Anyway, it's mostly for fun, even though it's kind of fiddly to do. I hope that you have a little bit of fun seeing Bun pray and Bun eat ice cream. Anyway, that's the update. I made my sad face sadder, and I added some new arms. A good way to celebrate the ice cream. Oh, Canary, you wanna sing? Oh no. I'm not prepared. I'm not prepared for sing, but if you want me to sing, I can make a valid attempt. Golly, right now? Right now? Sing a song right now? Oh, no worries. Waiting for a group redeem. No, that's okay. I mean, I did say that I was supposed to be... reading today. But... let's... I don't know how to... You're ready. I'm not ready. I'm not ready at all. But not a very good gift, I am afraid. But lyrics. I need to find some lyrics. I'm quite unprepared. Hold on. Oh. Well, since you went to the trouble of redeeming, I feel like I can't not sing. So uh. Months of I can't believe you would wait months for something like this, but I suppose if we're just gonna do a casual sing, we just do it a cappella since I don't think I'm allowed to play that instrumental. Anyway, it will be worth the wait. Oh, you don't know that, but that's true. What's the key? What's the key? Oh, it's so high. Yo. Oh, it's true. Well. Vamp Eru. Oh no. Lacrimosa. No! Stop. Oh, I'm quite embarrassed. Since we are here, I guess I'll just sing it from memory though. 暗闇の中でむつみ合う絶望と未来を悲しみを暴く月明かり冷たく照らしてた君のくれた秘密を知るべに青い夜の静けさを行くラクリモサ遠く砕けて消えた眩しい世界をもう一度愛したい瞳の中に夢を隠して汚れた心に涙が落ちてくるまでやばい I guess I can go. Oh, it's been a while since I last heard the rest of this song. 幻の馬車は闇を分け光のある方へ 夢という罠が僕たちをオムラへいざなう。空の上の無慈悲な神々、どんな叫びも届きはしないラクモさ。やばい。さあ。Oh, it's so high. It's been a while. Hold on. Is this okay? Are you good with this? I'm ready to hide in my coffin for the next forever. But I should finish the song. I should finish the song. Hold yeah. Hey. If you'll give me a moment to just okay, hold on. It's a bit high. Okay. Okay, wait. Oh, I don't remember this part well. 僕らは燃え盛る焚き木となりつかその空を焼き尽くそう。 And this part is too high, and so I always avoid it. Sorry. Yeah, but can I hit this? どうしよう。たか。Well, okay, I'll dip it. Lacrimosa GS in the Lacrimosa ここに生まれて落ちた血濡れた世界を恐れずに愛したい許されるより許し信じて汚れた地上で涙の日々を数えて I'm done. Let's read. Let's read instead. Let's read. I'm sorry that was extremely scuffed, but puts that out of my mind. I hope it was worth the redeem. I hope it was worth the redeem. Oh wait, let me off background music. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. Who told me it was a good idea to put singing in the redeems? No, no, I'm so sorry. Oh, just ooze. Okay, no worries. I will forget about that and move on to reading. I can't believe it took me 10 minutes just to sing that song, but let's read some. Let's read some some melodrama instead, shall we? While I forget about the Von acapella. Oh, good. Thank you for the bun drink water redeem. Drinks my water. Yeah, no, I'm quite ashamed, but thank you for redeeming. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. Ah, goodness. Okay, so now that we are back on to reading Dorian Gray, 25 minutes late, just a little update as to what has happened so far, yet again. So we have Dorian Gray, Lord Henry Wotton, and Basil Hallward, our main characters. Dorian Gray is very beautiful. We keep getting told this. We kept getting told this by the author and everyone around him. Dorian Gray falls in love with this actress, Sybil Vane, and after he confesses to her, she acts really poorly, and then he decides he no longer loves her, and then she commits suicide. And then after finding this out, Dorian Gray is very upset, but then he gets over it very quickly with the help of his friend, Lord Henry Wotton, who has a terrible mouth, but conceivably not as terrible a heart. And then he's just had a confrontation with Basil Hallward, in which Basil Hallward, the artist, has confessed that he has been kind of obsessed with him. And anyway, so Dorian Gray, who's had a full portrait done of him by Basil Hallward, after doing a bad thing to Sybil Vane, he looks at the portrait and he realizes that the portrait has changed, and he's like, oh, is it a reflection of my soul? Which is a very abstract thing to think, but it is in fact a reflection of his dirtying soul. So he's decided to hide it. And anyway, that's about where we are in the story. That was not a very good summary. Oh. Oh, wait. Oh, this one again. Oh, bun villain phase? Seriously? Okay, sure thing. You can't have ice cream right now. Anyway. Chapter 10. Okay, we're on chapter 10. Are you all with me so far? Can everyone hear me? When his servant entered, he looked at him steadfastly and wondered if he had thought of peering behind the screen. The man was impassive and waited for his orders. Wait, did I read this chapter already? No, I didn't, sorry. Dorian lit a cigarette and walked over to the glass and glanced into it. He could see the reflection of Victor's face perfectly. It was like a placid mask of civility. There was nothing to be afraid of there, yet he thought it best to be on his guard. Speaking very slowly, he told him to tell the housekeeper that he wanted to see her, and then to go to the frame maker and ask him to send 2 of his men round at once. It seemed to him that as the man left the room, his eyes wandered in the direction of the screen. Or was that merely his own fancy? After a few moments, in her black silk dress, with old-fashioned thread mittens on her wrinkled hands, Mrs. Leaf bustled into the library. He asked her for the key of the schoolroom. "The old schoolroom, Mr. Dorian," she exclaimed. "Why, it is full of dust. I must get it arranged and put straight before you go into it. It is not fit for you to see, sir. It is not, indeed." "I don't want it put straight, Leaf. I only want the key." "Well, sir, you'll be covered with cobwebs if you go into it. Why, it hasn't been opened for nearly 5 years, not since his lordship died." He winced at the mention of his grandfather. He had hateful memories of him. "It does not matter," he answered. "I simply want to see the place, that is all. Give me the key." "And here is the key, sir," said the old lady, going over the contents of her bunch with tremulously uncertain hands. "Here is the key. I'll have it off the bunch in a moment. But you don't think of living up there, sir? And you're so comfortable here?" "No, no," he cried petulantly. "Thank you, Leaf. That will do." She lingered for a few moments and was garrulous over some detail of the household. He sighed and told her to manage things as she thought best. She left the room, wreathed in smiles. As the door closed, Dorian put the key in his pocket and looked round the room. His eye fell on a large purple satin coverlet, heavily embroidered with gold. A splendid piece of late 17th century Venetian work that his grandfather had found in a convent. Yes, that would serve to wrap the dreadful thing in. It had perhaps served often as a pall for the dead. Now, it was to hide something that had a corruption of its own, worse than the corruption of death itself. Something that would breed horrors and yet would never die. What the worm was to the corpse, his sins would be to the painted image on the canvas. They would mar its beauty and eat away its grace. They would defile it and make it shameful. And yet, the thing would still live on. It would always be alive. He shuddered, and for a moment he regretted that he had not told Basil the true reason why he wished to hide the picture away. Basil would have helped him to resist Lord Henry's influence, the still more poisonous influences that came from his own temperament. The love that he bore him, for it was really love, had nothing in it that was not noble and intellectual. It was not that mere physical admiration of beauty is born of the senses, and that dies when the senses tire. It was such love as Michelangelo had known, and Shakespeare himself. Yes, Basil could have saved him, but it was too late now. The past could always be annihilated. Regret, denial, or forgetfulness could do that. But the future was inevitable. There were passions in him that would find their terrible outlet. Dreams. that would make the shadow of their evil real. He took up from the couch the great purple and gold texture that covered it, and holding it in his hands, passed behind the screen. Was the face on the canvas viler than before? It seemed to him that it was unchanged, and yet his loathing of it was intensified. Gold hair, blue eyes, rose-red lips, they were all there. It was simply the expression that had altered, that was horrible in its cruelty, compared to what he saw in it of censure or rebuke. How shallow Basil's reproaches about Sybil Vane had been, how shallow, and of what little account. His own soul was looking out at him from the canvas and calling him to judgment. A look of pain came across him, and he flung the rich pall over the picture. As he did so, a knock came to the door. "The persons are here, monsieur." He felt that the man must be got rid of at once. He must not be allowed to know where the picture was being taken to. There was something sly about him, and he had thoughtful, treacherous eyes. Sitting down at the writing table, he scribbled a note to Lord Henry, asking him to send him round something to read, and reminding him that they were to meet at 8:15 that evening. "Wait for an answer," he said, handing it to him. "And show the men in here." In 2 or 3 minutes, there was another knock, and Mr. Hubbard himself, the celebrated frame maker of South Audley Street, came in with a somewhat rough-looking young assistant. Mr. Hubbard was a florid, red-whiskered little man, whose admiration for art was considerably tempered by the inveterate, I don't know what this word is, impecuniosity of most of the artists who dealt with him. As a result, he never left his shop. He waited for people to come to him. But he always made an exception in favor of Dorian Gray. There was something about Dorian that charmed everybody. It was a pleasure even to see him. "What can I do for you, Mr. Gray?" he said, rubbing his fat, freckled hands. "I thought I would do myself the honor of coming round in person. I've got a beauty of a frame, sir. Picked it up at a sale. Old Florentine. Came from Fonthill, I believe. Admirably suited for a religious subject, Mr. Gray." "I'm so sorry you've given yourself the trouble of coming round, Mr. Hubbard. I shall certainly drop in and look at the frame, though I don't go in much at present for religious art, but today I only want a picture carried to the top of the house for me. It is rather heavy, so I thought I'd ask you to lend me a couple of your men." "No trouble at all, Mr. Gray. I'm delighted to be of any service to you. Which is the work of art, sir?" "This," replied Dorian, moving the screen back. "Can you move it, covering and all, just as it is? I don't want it to get scratched going upstairs." "There will be no difficulty, sir," said the genial frame maker, beginning, with the aid of his assistant, to unhook the picture from the long brass chains by which it was suspended. "And now, where shall we carry it to, Mr. Gray?" "I will show you the way, Mr. Hubbard, if you will kindly follow me. Or perhaps you'd better go in front. I'm afraid it is right at the top of the house. You'll go up by the front staircase, as it is wider." He held the door open for them, and they passed out into the hall and began the ascent. The elaborate character of the frame had made the picture extremely bulky, and now and then, in spite of the protests of Mr. Hubbard, who had the true tradesman's spirited dislike of seeing a gentleman doing anything useful, Dorian put his hand to it so as to help him.
Something of a load to carry, sir.
Gasped the little man when they reached the top landing, and he wiped his shiny forehead.
I'm afraid it is rather heavy,
murmured Dorian as he unlocked the door that opened into the room that was to keep for him the curious secret of his life and hide his soul from the eyes of men. He had not entered the place for more than 4 years, not since, indeed, since he had used it first as a playroom when he was a child, then as a study when he grew somewhat older. It was a large, well-proportioned room, which had been specially built by the last Lord Kelso for the use of the little grandson, for whom, for his strange likeness to his mother, and also for other reasons, he had always hated and desired to keep at a distance. It appeared to Dorian to have but little changed. There was the huge Italian cassone, with its fantastically painted panels and its tarnished gilt mouldings, in which he had so often hidden himself as a boy. On the wall behind it was hanging the same ragged Flemish tapestry where a faded king and queen were playing chess in a garden. How well he remembered it all. Every moment of his lonely childhood came back to him as he looked round. He recalled the stainless purity of his boyish life, and it seemed horrible to him that it was here the fatal portrait was to be hidden away. How little had he thought, in those dead days, of all that was in store for him. But there was no other place in the house so secure from prying eyes as this. He had the key, and no one else could enter it. Beneath its purple pall, the face painted on the canvas could grow bestial, sodden, and unclean. What did it matter? No one could see it. He himself would not see it. Why should he watch the hideous corruption of his soul? He kept his youth. That was enough. And besides, might his nature not grow finer after all? There was no reason that the future should be so full of shame. Some love might come across his life and purify him and shield him from those sins that seemed to be already stirring in spirit and flesh. Those curious, unpictured sins, whose very mystery lent them their subtlety and their charm. Perhaps, some day, the cruel look would have passed away from the scarlet, sensitive mouth, and he might show to the world Basil Hallward's masterpiece. No, that was impossible. Hour by hour, and week by week, the thing upon the canvas was growing old. It might escape the hideousness of sin, but the hideousness of age was in store for it. The cheeks would become hollow or flaccid. Yellow crow's feet would creep round the fading eyes and make them horrible. The hair would lose its brightness. The mouth would gape or droop, would be foolish or gross, as the mouths of old men are. There would be the wrinkled throat, the cold, blue-veined hands, the twisted body that he remembered in the grandfather who had been so stern to him in his boyhood. The picture had to be concealed. There was no help for it.
"Bring it in, Mr. Hubbard, please,"
he said warily, turning around.
"I'm sorry I kept you waiting so long. I was thinking of something else." "Always glad to have a rest, Mr. Gray. Where shall we put it, sir?"
answered the frame-maker, who was still gasping for breath.
"Oh, anywhere. Here, this will do. I don't want to have it hung up. Just lean it against the wall. Thanks."
"Might one look at the work of art, sir?"
Dorian started. "It would not interest you, Mr. Hubbard,"
he said, keeping his eye on the man
He felt ready to leap upon him and fling him to the ground if he dared to lift the gorgeous hanging that concealed the secret of his life. "I shan't trouble you any more now. I am much obliged for your kindness in coming round." Not at all, Mr. Gray. Ever ready to do anything for you, sir?"
And Mr. Hubbard tramped downstairs, followed by the assistant, who glanced back at Dorian with a look of shy wonder in his rough, uncomely face. She had never seen anyone so marvelous. When the sound of their footsteps had died away, Dorian locked the door and put the key in his pocket. He felt safe now. No one would ever look upon the horrible thing. No eye but his would see the shame. On reaching the library, he found that it was just after 5 o'clock, and that the tea had already been brought up. On the little table of dark perfumed wood was lying a note from Lord Henry, and beside it was a book, bound in yellow paper, the cover slightly torn and the edges soiled. A copy of the 3rd edition of the St. James Gazette had been placed on the tea tray. It was evident that Victor had returned. He wondered if he had met the men in the hall as they were leaving the house, and had wormed out of them what they had been doing. He would be sure to miss the picture, had no doubt missed it already, while he'd been laying the tea things. Perhaps some night he might find him creeping upstairs and trying to force the door of the room. It was a horrible thing to have a spy in one's house. He had heard of rich men who had been blackmailed all their lives by some servant, who had read a letter or overheard a conversation, or picked up a card with an address, or found beneath a pillow, or a withered flower, or a shred of crumpled lace. He sighed, and having poured himself out some tea, opened Lord Henry's note. It was simply to say that he had sent round the evening paper and a book that might interest him, and that he would be at the club at 8:15. He opened the St. James languidly and looked through it. A red pencil mark on the 5th page caught his eye. It drew attention to the following paragraph. Inquest on an actress. An inquest was held this morning at the Bell Tavern, Hoxton Road, by Mr. Danby, the district coroner, on the body of Sybil Vane, a young actress recently engaged at the Royal Theatre, Holborn. A verdict of death by misadventure was returned. Considerable sympathy was expressed for the mother of the deceased, who was greatly affected during the grieving of her evidence. And that of Dr. Burrell, who had made the post-mortem examination of the deceased. He frowned, and tearing the paper in two, went across the room and flung the pieces away. How ugly it all was, and how horribly real. Ugliness made things. He felt a little annoyed at Lord Henry for having sent him the report, and it was certainly stupid of him to have marked it with red pencil. Victor might have read it. The man knew more than enough English for that. Perhaps he had read it and had begun to suspect something. And yet, what did it matter? What had Dorian Gray to do with Sybil Vane's death? There was nothing to fear. Dorian Gray had not killed her. His eye fell on the yellow book that Lord Henry had sent him. What was it? He wondered. He went towards the little pearl-colored octagonal stand that had always looked to him like the work of some strange Egyptian bees that had wrought in silver, and taking up the volume, flung himself into an armchair and began to turn over the leaves. After a few minutes, he became absorbed. It was the strangest book that he had ever read.
it seemed to him that in exquisite raiment, and to the delicate sound of flutes, the sins of the world were passing in dumb show before him. Things that he had dimly dreamed of were suddenly made real to him. Things of which he had never dreamed were gradually revealed. It was a novel without a plot, and with only one character being, indeed, simply a psychological study of a certain young Parisian who spent his life trying to realize in the 19th century all the passions and modes of thought that belonged to every century except his own. And to sum up, as it were, in himself the various moods through which the world spirit had ever passed, loving, for their mere artificiality, those renunciations that men had unwisely called virtue, as much as those natural rebellions that wise men still called sin. The style in which it was written was that curious jeweled style, vivid and obscure at once, full of argot and of archaisms, of technical expressions, and of elaborate paraphrases. There were in it metaphors as monstrous as orchids and as subtle in colour. The life of the senses were described in the terms of mystical philosophy. One hardly knew at times whether one was reading the spiritual ecstasies of some medieval saint or the morbid confessions of a modern sinner. It was a poisonous book. The heavy odor of incense seemed to cling about its pages and to trouble the brain. The mere cadence of the sentences, the subtle monotony of their music, so full as it was of complex refrains and movements, elaborately repeated, produced in the mind of the lad, as he passed from chapter to chapter, a form of reverie, a malady of dreaming that made him unconscious of the falling day and creeping shadows, cloudless and pierced by one solitary star. A copper-green sky gleamed through the windows. He read on by its one light till he could read no more. Then, after his valet had reminded him several times of the lateness of the hour, he got up and, going into the next room, placed the book on the little Florentine table that always stood at his bedside and began to dress for dinner. It was almost 9 o'clock before he reached the club, where he found Lord Henry sitting alone in the morning room, looking very much bored. "I'm so sorry, Harry," he cried, "but really it is entirely your fault. That book you sent me so fascinated me that I forgot how the time was going." "Yes, I thought you would like it," replied his host, rising from his chair. "I didn't say I liked it, Harry. I said it fascinated me. There is a great difference." "Ah, you have discovered that," murmured Lord Henry, and they passed into the dining room. And so we reach the end of chapter 10. Turns my evil face off. Was it interesting? The summary of what happened in that chapter was basically Dorian Gray calls some people to help him move his painting into a room where he was locked as a child. And he fondly, hatefully recalls that his grandfather treated him quite coldly. Welcome, debut. And Lord Henry sends him a book, and there is a sentence here that describes everything you need to know despite all of the flowery prose. It says,
this is a poisonous book, and that is, I think, the best way to summon up the contents of that book. The book is poisonous. And that's it. And then he goes to dinner with Lord Henry. What's going to happen in chapter 11 is there's going to be a time skip. Chapter 11 is the fated chapter that I don't like to read in Dorian Gray. I think it's a very wasteful chapter. But it's it's very long, uselessly long, and it skips forward several years from this time here to the future. Time for speed. I'll run out of breath. I'll run out of breath while reading this. Probably. Let's see. How long is it? Oh, thank you so much, Literal Acorn 57, for subscribing with Prime. Not at all. Goodness. Super. No. Unfortunately not. But I am Oh no. Thank you for listening to me read in earnest, even though I sound like I'm out of breath half the time. I hope you will enjoy even this next chapter, which I don't know what to do. I think I will try to speed read it. Wonder how fast I can read this chapter. Okay, so yes, just to preface this chapter, it's a time skip, and that's all you really need to know. Shall we go on? Chapter. Deb, thank you for the donation. What am I gonna do about all these roles that I have to do? Yeah. Maybe I should just give you the prizes that you want instead. How many roles do you have? 12? 12? I won't think about it. Can I just give you Okay, we'll do those for you soon. Drinks my water. Okay, catches my breath. Chapter 11. If I'm not here, you can go ahead to Rotten. I feel like somehow that's not very fair. Oh, we'll see. For years, Dorian Gray could not free himself from the influence of this book, though perhaps it would be more accurate to say that he never sought to free himself from it. He procured from Paris no less than 9 large paper copies of the first edition, had them bound in different colours so they might suit his various moods and then changing fancies of nature, which he seemed at times to have almost entirely lost control. Here, the wonderful young person in who the romantic and scientific temperance was so strangely blended became to him a kind of prefiguring type of himself, and indeed the whole book seemed to him to contain the story of his own life written before he had ever lived it. In one point he was more fortunate than the novel's fantastic hero he never knew, never indeed had the cause to know that somewhat grotesque dread of mirrors and polished metal surfaces and still water from which came the young Parisian so early in his life, and which was occasioned by the sudden decay of a bow that once apparently had been so remarkable. It was with an almost cruel joy, and perhaps in nearly every joy is certainly in every pleasure, in every pleasure cruelty had its place, that he used to read the latter part of the book, with its really tragic, if not somewhat overemphasized account of the sorrow and despair of one who himself lost in what others in the world had most dearly valued. For the most... That's not right. For the wonderful beauty that so fascinated Basil Hallward and many others besides him never seemed to have believed him, even those who had heard of the most evil things who'd heard the most evil things against him. From time to time, strange rumours about his mode of life crept through London, and became the chatter of the clubs could not believe anything to his dishonour when they saw him. He always had the look of one who kept himself unspotted from the world. Men who had talked grossly became silent when Dorian Gray entered the room. There was something in the purity of his face that rebuked them. His mere presence seemed to recall to them the memory of the innocence they had tarnished. They wondered how one so charming and graceful as he was could have escaped the stain of an age that was at once sordid and sensual. Often on returning home from one of those mysterious and prolonged absences that gave rise to such strange conjecture among those who were its friends, or thought that they were so, he himself would creep upstairs to the locked room, open the door with a key that never left him, and stand with a mirror in front of the portrait that Basil Hallward had painted of him, looking now at the evil and aging face on the canvas, and now at the fair young face that laughed back at him from the polished glass. The very sharpness of the contrast used to quicken his sense of pleasure. He grew more and more enamoured of his own beauty, more and more interested in the corruption of his own soul. He would examine with minute care, and sometimes with a monstrous and terrible delight, the hideous lines that seared the wrinkling forehead, or crawled across the heavy sensual mouth, wondering sometimes which were the more horrible, the signs of sin or the signs of age. He would place his white hands beside the coarse, bloated hands of the picture and smile. He mocked the misshapen body and the failing limbs. There were moments indeed at night when, lying sleepless in his own delicately scented chamber in the sordid room of the ill-famed tavern near the docks, which, under an assumed name and disguise, it was his habit to frequent, he would think of the ruin he had brought upon his soul with a pity that was all the more poignant because it was purely selfish. But moments such as these were rare. The curiosity about life which Lord Henry had first stirred in him as they sat together in the garden of their friends seemed to increase with gratification. The more he knew, the more he desired to know. He had mad hungers that grew more ravenous as he fed them. Yet he was not really reckless, at any rate in his relations to society. Once or twice every month during the winter, or each Wednesday evening while the season lasted, he'd throw open to the world his beautiful house and have the most celebrated musicians of the day to charm his guests with the wonders of their art. His little dinners, and the settling of which Lord Henry had always assisted him, were noted as much for the careful selection and placing of those invited as for the exquisite taste shown in the decoration of the table, with its subtle symphonic arrangements of exotic flowers and embroidered cloths and Wait, this is it, right? This is the chapter that I find to be... Wait, yeah, no. It is. It is. Sorry, I had to make sure that I wasn't reading something that needed to be really understood. Where were we? Sorry. Indeed, there were many, especially among the very young men, who still fancied that they saw in Dorian Gray the true realization of a type in which they had dreamed of Eton or Oxford days, a type that was to combine something of the real culture of the scholar with all the grace and distinction and perfect manner of a citizen of the world. To them he seemed to be the company of which Dante describes as having sought to make themselves perfect by the worship of beauty. Like Gorty, he was one for whom the visible world existed, and certainly to him life himself were the first, the greatest of the arts, and for all the other arts seemed to him to be but a preparation, fashioned by which what is really fantastic becomes from a universal, and dandyism which, in its own way, is an attempt to assert the absolute modernity of beauty, had, of course, their fascination for him. His mode of dressing and the particular styles from which time to time he affected had their marked influence on the young exquisites of the Mayfair Bills and the Pall Mall Club windows, who copied in everything that he did, and tried to reproduce the accidental charm of his graceful, though to him only half-serious fopperies. For, while he was but too ready to accept the position that was almost immediately offered to him upon his coming of age, had found, indeed, a subtle pleasure in the thought that he might really become to the London of his own day what to imperial Neronian Rome the altar of the Satyricon once had been. Yet in his inmost heart, he desired to be something more than the mere arbiter elegantarium, to be consulted on the wearing of a jewel, the knotting of a necktie, or the conduct of a cane. He sought to elaborate some new scheme of life that would have its reasoned philosophy and its ordered principles, and find in the spiritualizing of the senses its highest realization. The worship of the senses has often and with much justice had been decreed, men feeling a natural instinct of terror, but passions and sensations that seem stronger than themselves, that they are conscious of sharing with the less highly organized forms of existence. But it appeared to Dorian Gray that the true nature of the senses had never been understood, and they had remained savage and animal merely because the world had sought to starve them into submission or to kill them by pain instead of aiming at making them elements of a new spirituality, of which a fine instinct for beauty was to be the dominant characteristic. As he looked back upon man moving through history, he was haunted by a feeling of loss, so much had been surrendered into such little purpose. There had been mad, willful rejections, monstrous forms of self-torture and self-denial, whose origin was fear and whose result was a degradation infinitely more terrible than that of fancied degradation, from which, in their ignorance, they had sought to escape. Nature, in her wonderful irony, had driving out the anchorite to feed with the wild animals of the desert and giving to the hermit the beasts of the field as his companions. Yes, there was to be, as Lord Henry had prophesied, a new hedonism that was to create life and to save it from the harsh and comely puritanism that is having in our own day its curious revival. It was to have its service of the intellect, certainly, yet it was to never to accept any theory or system that would involve the sacrifice of any mode of passionate experience. Its aim, indeed, was to be experience itself, and not the fruits of experience, sweet or bitter as they might be. The asceticism that deadens the senses, of the vulgar profligacy that dulls them. It was to know nothing, but it was to teach man to concentrate himself upon the moments of a life that is itself but a moment. There are a few of us who have not sometimes wakened before dawn, either after one of those dreamless nights that make us almost enamored of death, or one of those nights of horror and misshapen joy when through the chambers of the brain sweep phantoms more terrible than the reality itself, and instinct with that vivid life that lurks in all grotesques and lends to Gothic art its enduring vitality, this art being, one might fancy, especially the art of those whose minds have been troubled with the malady of reverie. Gradually, white fingers creep through the curtains, and they appear to tremble, and black, fantastic shapes, shadows crawl through the corners of the room and crouch there. Outside, there is the stirring of birds among the leaves, and the sound of men going forth to their work, or the sigh and sob of the wind coming down the hills and wandering round the silent house as though it feared to wake the sleepers, and yet it must call forth the sleep of their purple cave. Veil after veil of thin dusky gauze is left in front of the degrees of forms and colours of things that restore to them, and we watch the dawn remaking the dawn on its antique pattern. The wan mirrors get back them in McClive. The flameless tapers stand where we left them. Besides them lies the half-cut book that we've been studying, or the wide flower that this goes on so long. Or the letter that we've been afraid to read, that we read too often. Nothing seems to us changed. Out of the unreal shadows of the night that come back the real life which he had known, we had to resume it where it had left off, and this steals over us a terrible sense of the necessity for the continuance of energy in the same wearisome round of stereotypical habits, or the wild longing, it may be, that our eyelids might open some morning upon a world that had been refreshed and new. In the darkness for our pleasure, a world in which things that would have fresh shapes and colours and be changed, or have other secrets, a world in which the past would have little or no place, or survive at any rate in no conscious form of obligation or regret, the remembrance even of joy having its bitterness, and the memories of pleasure their pain. It was creation of such worlds as these that seemed to Dorian Gray to be the true object, or among the true objects of life, and in a search for sensation that would be once new and delightful and possess the element of stranger that is so essential to romance, he would often adopt certain modes of thoughts that he knew to be really alien to its nature, abandon himself to their subtle influences, and having, as it were, caught their colour and satisfied intellectual curiosity, leave them with a curious indifference that is not compatible with their real ardour of temperament, and that indeed, according to a certain modern psychologist, is often a condition of it. It was rumoured of him once that he was about to join the Roman Catholic Communion, and certainly the Roman ritual had always a great attraction for him. The daily sacrifice, more awful really than all the sacrifices of the antique world, stirred him as much by its superb rejection of the influence of the... All the sacrifices of the antique world stirred him as much by its superb rejection of the evidence of the senses as by the primitive simplicity of its elements and the eternal pathos of the human tragedy that sought to symbolize. He loved to kneel down on the cold marble pavement and watch the priest in his stiff-showered dalmatic slowly and with white hands moving alongside the veil of the tabernacle, or raising aloft the jeweled lantern-shaped monstrance with that pallid wafer that of times one would fain think is indeed the panis celestis, the bread of angels, or robed in the garments of the passions of Christ, breaking the host into the chalice and smiting the breast for its sins. The fuming senses, the grave voice, and the lace and scarlet tossed into the air like great flowers had their subtle fascination for him. As he passed out, he used to look with wonder at the black confessionals, long to sit in the dim shadow of one of them, listen to men and women whispering through the worn grating of the true story of their lives. But he never fell into the error of arresting his intellectual development by any formal acceptance of the creed or system, or by mistaking for a house in which to live an inn that is suitable for the sojourn of a night, or for a few hours of the night in which there are no stars and the moon is travail, mysticism for its marvellous power of making common things strange to us in this law, and too long, and which there are no stars on the moon. Oh no, that's the wrong line. Making common things strange to us. A subtle antinomianism that always seems to accompany it moved him for a season. Good night, Psyche. Give me a moment. For a season, he inclined to the material doctrines of the Darwinistic movements in Germany and found. Thanks for the bun drink. Water redeem. Hold on. I found a curious pleasure in tracing the thoughts and passions of men to some holy cell in the brain or some white cell in the body, delighting in the conception of the absolute dependence of the spirit in which certain physical condition, morbins of healthy, morbin or deceased. Yeah, it has been said of him before, no theory of life seemed to him to be of any importance compared with life itself. He felt keenly conscious of how barren and all intellectual speculation is when separated from action and experiment. He knew that the senses, no less than the soul, have their spiritual mysteries to reveal. So he would now study perfumes and the secrets of their manufacture, distilling heavily scented oils and burning under his gums from the east. He saw that there were no mood of the mind had not its counterpart in the sensuous life, and set himself to discover their true relations. Wondering where there was in frankincense that made one mystical, and in ambergris that stirred in one's passions, and in violets that woke the memory of dead romances, and in musk that troubled the brain, and in champak that stained the imagination, seeking often to elaborate a new real psychology of perfumes and to estimate the real influence of several smelling roots and scented pollen-laden flowers, of aromatic balms, and of dark and fragrant woods, of spikenard that sickens, of hovinia that makes men mad, and of aloes that are said to expel melancholy from the soul. At another time he devoted himself entirely to music, and in a long latticed room, with a milking and gold-selling and wounds of olive green lattice, used to give curious concerts in which mad gypsies tore wild music from little zithers, or grave yellow shrill Tunisians plucked at the stained strings of monstrous lutes, while grinning negroes bleated monotonously upon gopher drums and grouched upon scarlet mats. Harsh intervals and scripted shorts. The schools of barbaric music stirred him at times when Schubert's grace and Chopin's beautiful sorrows and all the mighty harmonies of Beethoven himself fell unheeded on his ear. He collected together from all the parts of the world the strangest instruments that could be found, either in the tombs of dead nations or among the few savage tribes that have survived contact with Western civilizations, blah, 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 blah. Music from across the world. I will skip the rest of this passage. I should have skipped most of these passages. The fantastic character of these instruments fascinated him, and he felt a curious delight in the thought that, like nature, has him monstrous things of bestial shape, and with hideous voices. Yet after some time he wearied of them, and would sit in his box at the opera, either alone or with Lord Henry, listening in rapt pleasure to Tannhausen, seething in the prelude to that work, great work of art, a presentation of the tragedy of his own soul. On one occasion he took up the study of jewels, and appeared at a costume ball as Anne Joyeuse, Admiral of France, in a dress covered with 560 pearls. This taste enthralled him for years, and indeed may be said never to have left him. He would often spend a whole day settling and resettling in their cases various stones that would have collected, such as the office green chrysoberyl at Thames red by lamplight, cymophane with its wire-like line of silver, the pistachio-coloured peridot, rose pink and white, yellow topazes. Jewels here. He loved the red gold of the sunstone. More jewels here. He procured from the Amsterdam 3 emeralds of extraordinary size. More jewels here. Why is this so long? And at a turquoise that was the envy of all the connoisseurs. He discovered wonderful stories also about jewels. And Alphonse's clerical discipline as servant was mentioned with eyes of real descent, and the romantic history of Alexander, the conqueror of Amatia, was said to have found in the Vale of Jordan stakes with the collars of real emeralds growing on their backs. There was a gem in the grain of the dragon, Philostratus told us, and by the exhibition of golden letters in the scarlet robe, that monster could be thrown into a magic sleep and slain. According to the great alchemist Pierre de Boniface, the diamond rendered a man invisible, and the agate of made him eloquent. The cornelian appeased anger, and the hyacinth provoked sleep, and the amethyst drove away the fumes of wine. The garnet cast out demons, and the hydropicus deprived the moon of her colour. The sunlight waxed and waned with the moon, and the Melicius that discovered thieves could be affected only by the blood of kids. The bazaar that was found in the heart of the Arabian Sea was a charm that could cure the plague. And the nests of Arabian birds, it was the asphalets that, according to the Democritus, kept the wearer from any danger by fire. Thank you, Sullivan. Drink water, Redeem. Oh, we're not done yet. Hold on. We got this. First, I'm going to skip this entire paragraph. When the Duke of Allerton, son of Alexander the Sixth, visited Les, at 12th of France, his horse was loaded with gold leaves according to Brantome, and his cap had double rows of rubies that threw out a great light. Charles of England had red ribbon stars, hung with 421 diamonds. Richard II had a coat valued at 30,000 marks, which was covered in palace rubies. Hall described Henry VIII on the way to the Tower previous to his coronation as wearing a jacket of raised gold, the placard embroidered with diamonds and other rich stones in great bordering about his neck and large molasses. The favourites of James I wore earrings of emeralds set in gold filigrane. Edward II kept a Pierre's Gaveston astute, a red gold arm studded with jacinths, a collar of red roses set with turquoise stones, and a skull cap passing with pearls. Henry II wore jeweled gloves reaching to the elbow, and a hawk glove sewn with 12 rubies and 52 great orients. The ducal hat of Charles the Rash, the last Duke of Burgundy of his race, was hung with pear-shaped pearls and studded with sapphires. How exquisite life had once been, how gorgeous in its pomp and decoration. Even to read of the luxury of the dead was wonderful. And he turned his attention to embroideries and to tapestries that performed the office and frescoes and the children's of the northern regions of Europe. As he investigated the subject, he always had an extraordinary faculty of becoming absolutely absorbed for the moment in which he took up. He was almost saddened by the reflection of the ruin that time wrought on beautiful, wonderful things. He at any rate had to escape that. Summer followed summer, and the yellow jonquils ballooned and died many times, and lights of horror repeated the story of the shame, but he was unchanged. No winter marred his face or stained his fur like bloom. How different it was with material things. Where had they passed to? Where was the great crocus-coloured roof in which the gods fought against the giants to wit wrought by brown girls, for the pleasure of Athena? With the huge Valerian that Nero had stretched across the Colosseum of Rome, the titan sail of purple and which represented the starry sky and Apollo driving a chariot drawn by white gilt-reined steeds. He longed to see the curious table Applicants wrought for the priest of the sun, on which displayed all the dainties and viands that could be wanted for a feast. The mortuary cloth of King Chilfrig with its 300 gold piece. The fantastic rose that excited the indignation of the Bishop of Pontus, and were figured with lions, panthers, bears, dogs, forest, rocks, hunters, all in fact that a painted copy from nature, and a coat that Charles of Orleans once wore, on the sleeves of which were embroidered the verses of a song beginning Madame. The musical accompaniment of the words being wrought in gold thread on each note of square shape in those days, formed with poor pearls. He read of the room that was repaired at the palace of Reims for the use of Queen Joan of Burgundy. It was decorated with 1,321 parrots. Skips ahead. And so for a whole year, he sought to accumulate the most exquisite specimens that he could find at textile embroidered work, getting in the dainty Dali museums finally brought with gold thread palmates and stitched over with iridescent beetles' wings, the dagger gauzes that from their transparency known in the east as woven air and running water, and evening dew, strange figure cloths from Java, elaborate yellow Chinese hangings. Books bound in 20 satins or fair blue silks and wrought with fleur-de-lis, birds and images, veils of glasses worked in hungry points, Sicily brocades, stiff Spanish velvets, Georgian work with its gilt cords. He had a special passion also for ecclesiastical vestments, as indeed he had every collected for the service of the church. Skips this entire paragraph. For these treasures and everything which he had collected in his lovely house would be to him means of forgetfulness, means by which he could escape for a season from the fear that seemed to him at times to be too great to be borne. Upon the walls of his lonely locked room, which he had spent so much of his boyhood, he had hung, with his own hands, the terrible portrait with its changing features had shown him the real degradation of his life, and in front of it he had draped the purple and gold pearls a curtain. For weeks he would not go there, and would forget the hideous painted thing and get back on his light heart, his wondrous joyousness.
his passionate devotion and mere existence, and then suddenly some night he would creep out of the house, go down to dreadful places near Flowgate Fields, and stay there day after day until he was driven away. On his return he would sit in front of the picture, sometimes loathing it but himself, it filled with other times with that pride of individualism that is time, the fascination of sin, and sometimes with great pleasure. Secret pleasure, the sensation shapen shadow that had to bear the burden that should have been his own. After a few years he could not endure to be out of England, and gave up the villa that he had shared with Trueville with Lord Henry, as well as a little white walled house at Algiers, which they had more than once spent the winter. He hated to be separate from the picture that was so part of his life, and was so afraid that during his absence I might gain access to the room and sight of the elaborate bath that he caused to be pasted upon the door. He was quite conscious it would tell them nothing. It was true that the portrait was still preserved under the foulness and the ugliness of the face, its marked likeness to himself, but what could they learn from that? He would laugh at anyone who tried to taunt him. He had not painted it. What it was to him, how vile and how full of shame it looked. Even if he told them, would they believe it? Yet he was afraid. Sometimes when he was down at his house in Nottinghamshire, entertaining the fashionable young men of his own rank, who were his chief companions, and astounding the country by the wanton luxury and gorgeous splendor of his mode of life, he would suddenly leave a guess and rush back to town to see that the door had not been tampered with, and the picture was still there. What if it should be stolen? The mere thought leave him cold with horror. Surely the world would know of his secret then. Perhaps the world had already suspected it. For while he fascinated many, there were not a few who distrusted him. He was very newly blackballed at a West End club, of which his birth and societal position willfully entitled him to become a member, and it was said that on one occasion, when he was brought by a friend into the smoking room at the Churchill, the Duke of Berg and another gentleman got up in his marked manner and went out. Curious stories became current about him after he had passed his 25th year. It was rumours that he had been seen brawling with foreign sailors in a low den in distant parts of Whitechapel, and that he had consulted with thieves and coiners and knew the mysteries of the trade. His extraordinary absences became notorious, and when he used to reappear again in society, men would whisper to each other in corners, or pass him with a sneer and look at him with cold, searching eyes, as though they were determined to discover his secret. Of such insolences and attempted slights as he, of course, took no notice, and in the company of most people, his frank, debonair manner, his charming, boyish smile, and the infinite grace of that wonderful youth that never seemed to leave him were in themselves a sufficient answer of the calumnies they soon termed him. They was circulated about him. It was remarked, however, that some of those who had been most intimate with him appeared after time to shun him. Women who had widely adored him and for his sake had braved all societal censure, sent convention of defiance, was seen to grow pallid with shame or horror of Dorian Gray into the room. Yet these whispered scandals only increased in the eyes of many. His strange and dangerous charm, his great wealth, was a certain element of security. Society, civilized society at least, is never very ready to believe anything to the detriment of those who are both rich and fascinating. It feels instinctively that manners are more of importance than morals, and its opinion the highest respectability is of much less value than the possession of a good chef. And after all, it is a very poor consolation to be told that the man who is given a bad dinner or poor wine is reproachable in his private life. In even the cardinal vows cannot atone for the half-cold entrees, as Lord Henry remarked once in a discussion of the subject, and there is possibly a good deal to be said for his view, for the canon of good society are, or should be the same as the canons of art. Form is absolutely essential to it. It should have the dignity of a ceremony as well as by its unreality, and should combine the enthusiastic character of romantic play with the wit and beauty that makes such plays delightful to us. Its insincerity such a terrible thing? I think not. It is merely a method by which we can multiply our personalities. Such, at any rate, was Dorian Gray's opinion. He used to wonder at the shallow psychology of those who conceive the ego in man as a thing simple, permanent, reliable, and of essence. To him, man was a being of myriad lives and myriad sensations, a complex, multiform creature that borne within itself strange legacies of thought and passion, and whose very flesh was tainted with the monstrous maladies of the dead. He loved to stroll through the gaunt, cold picture gallery of his country house and look at the various portraits of those whose blood flowed in his veins. Oh, was it young Herbert's life that he sometimes led had some strange poisonous germ crept from body to body till it had reached his own? Was it some dim sense of the grace that had made him so suddenly enormous without cause give utterance in Basil Hallward's studio to the mad prayer that had so changed his life? Here in gold-embroidered red doublet, jewelled coat, and gilt-headed ruff, and Sir Banstead, Anthony Sherrard with his silver and black armour piled at his feet. Where had his
Thank you for the fun drink water redeem. Drinks water. Where are we? Where had this man's legacy been? How the love for Giovanna enables bequeathed him some inheritance of sin and shame, where his own actions below the dreams of dead man not due to realize. Here from the fading canvas, my Lady Elizabeth Deborah, in his gauze hood, pale stomach, and pink glass sleeves. Ah, what a mouthful. A flower was in her right hand, her left clasped in a collar of white and damask roses. On a table by her side lay a mandolin and an apple. There were large green rosettes upon her little pointed shoes. He knew her life, and the strange stories that were told about her lovers had something of her temperament in him. This is just about his relatives. He's looking at paintings of him. Let's skip this passage. Yet one had ancestors in literature as well as in one's own race. Nearer perhaps in type and temperament, many of them, certainly with an influence in which one was more absolutely conscious. There were times in which it appeared to Dorian Gray that the whole of history was merely the record of his own life, not as he had lived it in act and circumstance, but as his imagination had created it for him, as it had been in his brain and in his passions. He felt that he had known him all. The strange and terrible figures that had passed across the stage of the world and made sin so marvelous and evil so full of subtlety, it seemed to him that in some mysterious way their lives had been his own. The hero... I could skip this passage as well. Let's skip this. Over and over again, Dorian used to read this fantastic chapter, and the 2 chapters immediately following, in which, as some curious tapestries or cunningly wrought enamels, depicted the awful and beautiful forms of which blood and vice and weariness had made monstrous or mad. Filippo, the Duke of Milan, who slew his wife and painted her lips with a scarlet poison that her lover might suck death from the dead thing he fondled. Pietro Barbi, the Venetian, known as Paul II, who sought in his vanity to assume the title of Formosus, and whose turn valid 200,000 florins was bought at the price of a terrible sin. More examples in the book he's reading. I will skip the rest of this passage as well. Okay. Grisanetta Balagoni, who slew Estor with his bride and similated her with his page, and whose common news was such that, as he lay dying in the yellow piazza of Perugia, those who had hated them could not choose but weep, and Atalanta, who had cursed him, blessed him. There was a horrible fascination in them all. He saw them at night, and they troubled his imagination in the day. The Renaissance knew of strange manners of poisoning by a helmet and a lighted torch, by an embroidered glove and a jewel fan, by a gilded pomander, and by an amber chain. Dorian Gray had been poisoned by a book. There were moments when he looked on an evil simply as a mode through which he could realize his conception of the beautiful. And that is the end of chapter 11. I can't feel my face. I ended up skipping a lot of words at the end, but we made it to the end. Sorry. It's foolish of me to try and read this when I am already short of breath to begin with. Thank you for the bun stretch redeem. Your... yeah, but... I wasn't tired. I wasn't this tired reading the other one. I need a moment today. Okay, so even though I attempted to read this as fast as I could, the chapter was very long, so I'll summarize it for you. The summary is basically that for years Dorian Gray keeps reading the book that Lord Henry gives him, even though the book has no particular story. It's changing his thinking. It's changing the way he's perceiving the world. And somehow he feels himself that he is written into it. And for some reason, yes, he buys a lot of copies of it. He describes a lot of characters, like experiences within the book that I couldn't be bothered to repeat to you, but so basically, as you know, he doesn't change throughout the years. And so while his portrait gets old, Dorian Gray, of course, himself stays young. And so, you know, as he's living his life, various rumors and whatnot begin to spread about him. And there are people who avoid him. It says that people who care about him, who cared about him once, at some point avoid him like the plague. It doesn't explain why, but it just says that they do. And then it also says that sometimes, well, basically he starts going insane. He becomes extremely paranoid. And sometimes he forgets about it, but then sometimes he goes back to the locked room and he looks about it. He stares at the portrait and he examines how ugly he's become. It just talks about how his life has changed through the years. And then it talks a little bit more about, you know, his realizations through the book. Blah, 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 blah. More about the book. The most important sentence in this entire chapter is this very short sentence at the end that says, Dorian Gray had been poisoned by a book. Actually, that's all you need to know about this chapter. That's the only relevant that's the only relevant sentence in this entire chapter. And yes, it's very useless. It's very flowery. Anyway, this is the chapter that I find to be the most useless in the whole book, which I mentioned the first time. If you understood anything that I read through just now, I'm very proud of you. I don't think I was making a lot of sense by the end, but that is what happened in chapter 11. Thank you for understanding my disdain for it. Okay. Well, back to reading properly. Let's read one more chapter, and we will be reading this chapter 12. This occurs after the time skip has happened. Bun could be the next rap god. No, I don't think so. I do not think so, but thanks for enduring. Thanks for enduring the last. I don't know how long that took me to read, but it was quite a long time. Chapter 12. It was on the 9th of November, the eve of his own 38th birthday, as he often remembered afterwards. He was walking home about 11 o'clock from Lord Henry's, where he had been dining, and was wrapped in heavy furs as the night was cold and foggy. At the corner of Grosvenor Square and South Audley Street, a man passed him in the mist, walking very fast, and with the collar of his grey ulster turned up. He had a bag in his hand. Dorian recognized him. It was Basil Hallward. A strange sense of fear, for which he could not account, came over him. He made no sign of recognition and went on quickly in the direction of his own house. But Hallward, he had seen him. Dorian heard him first stopping on the pavement, and then hurrying after him. In a few moments, his hand was on his arm. Dorian! What an extraordinary piece of luck! I've been waiting for you in your library ever since 9 o'clock. Finally, I took pity on your tired servant and told him to go to bed, as he let me out. I'm off to Paris by the midnight train, and I particularly wanted to see you before he left. I thought it was you, or rather your fur coat, as you passed me. But I wasn't quite sure. Didn't you recognize me? In this fog, my dear Basil? Why, I can't even recognize Grosvenor Square. I believe my house is somewhere about here, but I don't feel at all certain about it. I'm sorry you're going away, as I have not seen you for ages. But I suppose you'll be back soon. No, I'm going to be out of England for 6 months. I intend to take a studio in Paris and shut myself up till I've finished a great picture I have in my head. However, it wasn't about myself I wanted to talk. Here we are at your door. Let me come in for a moment. I have something to say to you. I shall be charmed, but won't you miss your train? Said Dorian Gray languidly as he passed up the steps and opened the door with his latchkey. The lamplight struggled out through the fog, and Hallward looked at his watch. I have heaps of time, he answered. The train doesn't go till 12:15, and it is only just 11. In fact, I was on my way to the club to look for you when I met you. You see, I shan't have any delay about luggage, as I've sent on my heavy things. All I have with me is this bag, and I can easily get to Victoria in 20 minutes. Dorian looked at him and smiled. What a way for a fashionable painter to travel. A Gladstone bag and an ulster. Come in, or the fog will get into the house. And mind you don't talk about anything serious. Nothing is serious nowadays. At least nothing should be. Hallward shook his head as he entered and followed Dorian into the library. There was a bright wood fire blazing in the large open hearth. The lamps were lit, and an open Dutch silver spirit case stood, with some siphons of soda water, large cut glass tumblers. You see, your servant made me quite at home, Dorian. He gave me everything I wanted, including your best gold-tipped cigarettes. He is a most hospitable creature. I like him better than the Frenchman he used to have. What has become of the Frenchman, by the way? Dorian shrugged his shoulders. I believe he married Lady Radley's maid and has established her in Paris as an English dressmaker. Anglo money is very fashionable over there now, I hear. Seems silly of the French, doesn't it? But, do you know, he was not at all a bad servant. I never liked him, but I had nothing to complain about. One often imagines things that are quite absurd. He was really very devoted to me and seemed quite sorry when he went away. Have another brandy and soda? Or would you like some hock and seltzer? I always take hock and seltzer myself. There's sure to be some in the next room. Thanks, I won't have any more, said the painter, taking his cap on, coat off, and throwing them on the bag that he placed in the corner. "And now, my dear fellow, I want to speak to you, seriously. Don't frown like that. You make it so much more difficult for me." "What is it all about?" cried Dorian in his petulant way, flinging himself down on the sofa. "I hope it is not about myself. I'm tired of myself tonight. I should like to be somebody else." "It is about yourself," answered Hallwood in his grave, deep voice. "And I must say it to you. I shall only keep you half an hour." Dorian sighed and lit a cigarette. "Half an hour. It is not much to ask of you, Dorian, and it is entirely for your own sake that I am speaking. I think it right that you should know that the most dreadful things are being said against you in London. I don't wish to know anything about them. I love scandals about other people, but scandals about myself don't interest me. They have not got the charm of novelty. They must interest you, Dorian. Every gentleman is interested in his good name. You don't want people to talk of you as something vile and degraded. Of course, you have your position, and your wealth, and all that kind of thing, but position and wealth are not everything. Mind you, I don't believe these rumors at all. At least I can't believe that when I see you. Sin is a thing that writes itself across a man's face. It cannot be concealed. People talk sometimes of secret vices. There are no such things. If a wretched man has a vice, it shows itself in the lines of his mouth, the droop of his eyelids, the molding of his hands even. Somebody, I won't mention his name, but you know him, came to me last year to have his portrait done. I've never seen him, and had never heard anything about him at the time, though I've heard a good deal since. He offered an extravagant price. I refused him. There was something in the shape of his fingers that I hated. I know now that I was quite right in what I fancied about him. His life is dreadful. But you, Dorian, with your pure, bright, innocent face, your marvelous, untroubled youth, I can't believe anything against you. And yet I see you very seldom. You never come down to the studio now. And when I am away from you, and I hear all these hideous things that people are whispering about you, I don't know what to say. Why is it, Dorian, that a man like the Duke of Berg leaves the room of a club when you enter it? Why is it that so many gentlemen in London will neither go to your house or invite you to theirs? You used to be a friend of Lord Staveley. I met him at dinner last week. Your name happened to come up in conversation. Staveley curled his lip and said that you might have the most artistic tastes, that you are a man whom no pure-minded girl should be allowed to know, whom no chaste woman should be in the same room with. I reminded him that I was a friend of yours, and asked him what he meant. He told me right, before everybody. It was horrible. Why is your friendship so fatal to young men? There was that wretched boy in the Guards who committed suicide. You were his great friend. There was Sir Henry Ashton, who had to leave England with a tarnished name. You and he were inseparable. What about Adrian Singleton and his dreadful end? What about Lord Kent's only son and his career? I met his father yesterday in St. James Street. He seemed broken, with shame and sorrow. What about the young Duke of Perth? What sort of life has he got now? What gentleman would associate with him? Stop, Basil. You're talking about things of which you know nothing, said Dorian Gray, biting his lip, with a note of infinite contempt in his voice. You ask me why Burke leaves a room when I enter it. It is because I know everything about his life,
Not because he knows anything about mine. With such blood as he has in his veins, how could his record be clean? You ask me about Henry Ashton and young Perth? Did I teach one his vices and the other his debauchery? If Kent's silly son takes his wife from the streets, what is that to me? If Adrian Singleton writes his friend's name across a bill and I as keeper, I know how people chatter in England. The middle classes air their moral prejudice over their gross dinner tables and whisper what they call the profligacies of the betters, in order to try and pretend that they are in so smart society and on intimate terms with people that they slander. In this country, it is enough for a man to have distinction, and brains for every common tongue to wag against him. And what sort of lives do these people, who pose as being moral, lead themselves? My dear fellow, you forget that we are in the native land of the hypocrite.
Dorian, cried Hallward. That is not the question. England is bad enough, I know, and English society is all wrong. That is the reason why I want you to be fine. You have not been fine. One has a right to judge of a man by the effect he has over his friends. Yours seem to have lost all sense of goodness, of honor, of purity. You have filled them with a madness for pleasure. They've gone down into the depths. You led them there. Yes, you led them there, and yet you can smile as you are smiling now. And there is worse behind. I know you and Harry are inseparable. Surely for that reason, if none other, you should not have made his sister's name a byword. Take care, Basil. You go too far. I must speak, and you must listen. You shall listen. When you met Lady Gwendolen, not a breath of scandal had ever touched her. Is there a single decent woman in London now with who would drive with her to the park? Why, even her children are not allowed to live with her. Then there are other stories. Stories that you have been seen creeping at dawn out of dreadful houses, and slinking in disguise into the flower stands in London. Are they true? Can they be true? When I first heard them, I laughed. I hear them now, and they make me shudder. What about your country house, and the life that is there? Dorian, you don't know what is said about you. I won't tell you that I don't want to preach to you. I remember Harry saying once that every man who turned himself into an amateur curate, for the moment, always began by saying that and then proceeded to break his word. I do want to preach to you. I want you to lead such a life that would make the world respect you. I want you to have a clean name and a fair record. I want you to get rid of the dreadful people you associate with. Don't shrug your shoulders like that. Don't be so indifferent. You have a wonderful influence. Let it be for good, not for evil. They say that you corrupt everyone with whom you become intimate, and that it is quite sufficient for you to enter a house for shame of some kind to follow after. I don't know whether it is so or not. How should I know? But it is said of you. I am told things that it seems impossible to doubt. Lord Gloucester was one of my greatest friends at Oxford. He showed me a letter that his wife had written to him when she was dying alone in her villa at Mentone. Your name was implicated in the most terrible confession I'd ever read. I told him that it was absurd, that I knew you thoroughly, that you were incapable of anything of the kind. Know you? I wonder, do I know you? Before I could answer that, I should have to see your soul. To see my soul, muttered Dorian Gray, starting up from the sofa and turning almost white from fear. Yes, answered Hallward gravely, and with deep-toned sorrow in his voice. To see your soul,
but only God can do that.
The bitter laugh of mockery broke from the lips of the younger man.
You shall see it yourself. Tonight,
he cried, seizing a lamp from the table.
Come. It is your own handiwork. Why shouldn't you look at it? You can tell the world all about it afterwards if you choose. Nobody would believe you. If they did believe you, they would like me all the more better for it. I know the age better than you do, though you will prate about it so tediously. Come, I tell you. You have chatted enough about corruption. Now, you shall look on it, face to face.
There was the madness of pride in every word he uttered. He stamped his foot upon the ground in his boyish, insolent manner. He felt a terrible joy at the thought that someone else was to share his secret, and that the man who had painted the portrait that was the origin of all his shame was to be burdened for the rest of his life with the hideous memory of what he had done.
Yes,
he continued, coming closer to him and looking steadfastly into his stern eyes.
I shall show you my soul. You shall see the thing that you fancy only God can see.
Hallward started back.
This is blasphemy, Dorian. You must not say things like that. They're horrible, and they don't mean anything. You think so?
He laughed again.
I know so. As for what I said to you tonight, I said it for your own good. You know I've always been a staunch friend to you. Don't touch me. Finish what you have to say.
A twisted flash of pain shot across the painter's face. He paused for a moment, and a wild feeling of pity came over him. After all, what right had he to pry into the life of Dorian Gray if he had done a tithe of what is rumoured about him, how much he must have suffered? Then, he straightened himself up, walked over to the fireplace, and stood there, looking at the burning logs with their frost-like ashes and their throbbing cores of flame.
I'm waiting, Basil,
said the young man in a hard, clear voice. He turned round.
What I have to say is this. You must give me some answer to these horrible charges that are made against you. If you tell me that they are absolutely untrue from beginning to end, I shall believe you. Deny them, Dorian. Deny them. Can't you see what I am going through? My God, don't tell me that you are bad and corrupt and shameful.
Dorian Gray smiled. There was a curl of contempt in his lips.
Come upstairs, Basil,
he said quietly.
I keep a diary of my life from day to day, and it never leaves the room in which it is written. I shall show it to you if you come with me.
I shall come with you, Dorian, if you wish it.
I see I've missed my train. It makes no matter. I can go tomorrow. But don't ask me to read anything tonight. All I want is a plain answer to my question. That shall be given to you upstairs. I could not give it here. You will not have to read long.
And so we reach the end of chapter 12. And so the summary of this chapter is basically that we've skipped ahead several years. It says the eve of his own 38th birthday. So almost 10 years have passed since... 10? 10 years? Around there, almost 10 years have passed since we first met Dorian Gray, Basil Hallward, etc., etc. It is dark night, and Dorian Gray bumps into Basil Hallward. And so Basil Hallward is like, I want to speak to you. And so they go into his house to talk. And Basil Hallward basically confronts Dorian and says, I hear all kinds of rumors about you. And all of them are bad. Which is basically what he says. And then he's like, Dorian, I think you're a good person. Please deny them. And Dorian doesn't deny them. He doesn't really say anything. And then, with the intention of showing Basil Hallward his portrait, he begins to lead him upstairs. And that is where we are in the book post-time skip. Okay, okie doke. Let's return to the front. We're done for the day, but thank you for sticking around with me as I die over chapter 11. Oh my goodness. My face tingles. I hope you enjoyed the enjoyed the update to Dorian Gray. Oh, Smear. I thank you for coming to listen. Today I mostly sped read through a very long chapter, but the VOD will be available if you want to catch up on the chapter before that. And oh no, thank you for listening. No, it's okay, and it's not my voice. It is my lack of strength. But hope it wasn't too draining. Oh, it was, but it's not because reading fast is draining. It's because I am just too feeble. But no worries. It's very interesting to see where the story is heading now. So, on this note, I hope to catch you again for the next installment of Dorian Gray melodrama daytime television reading. I'm not really reading it properly, which I'm also sorry for. But thank you for listening. Have a blessed day, Yua. Thank you. I think I will not do my roles today, which I'm very sorry for. I feel at some point I should just I don't really know what to do. But it's at some point I must catch up on roles for everybody. So sorry to keep you waiting. For now I will evaporate. Where? Oh, whoops. Where am I? Oh, they're all gone for some reason. Oh, never mind. Oh, on my wave. Farewell, farewell. Wish you all a good night. Wait. Dribble away my background music. There we go. Good night, good night. Thank you for your company. Thank you for the stream as always. Good night.